Anyway, so um, today is Friday. Is that just checking the date? Yeah, it's Friday. So Friday the 2nd of May, 2025. So tomorrow in Australia is the final day for voting in the Australian federal election. Um, uncharacteristic uh, uncharacteristically voted in early pre-polling. Um, Voted with Trumpet of Patriots dead last. Um, so and in case you want to know, um, uh, independents where possible um, first, followed by Greens, ALP. Was proud to see that there was a Tory party, voted for them too. Didn't vote for them first because the odds of them getting a candidate is not as high. Um, but what the electorate to have sort of like sort of major party support and don't know who they have candidates in other electorates. So didn't found out that from the ballot paper amazingly. Um, and there's a couple of strange parties. Put them lower. Just wasn't sure what they were about, and pulling hands in towards the bottom, of course, but not as low as Trumpet of Patriots. So they've got no votes. Um, they're right at the bottom. Okay. Been pleased unsurprised to see that there's a lot of comments from Australians on YouTube saying, yeah, no, there'll be no Clive Palmer, thanks. They were revolted that after Trump got elected and started running amok, Mr. Palmer's turned around and said he wants policies like Trump, and it was like, because there's no one in Australia that likes Donald Trump, okay? They've all heard what he's gotten up to, and they're all upset at Mr. Trump and what's going on over there. So, unsurprisingly, Mr. Palmer's party is going to lose. And what happened? Mr. Palmer's party is definitely going to lose. And so, what happened there is there's in Australia there's appears to be a lot more variety of candidates than you'll find in the USA. So the two major parties still are exerting a strong influence in Australian politics, and over the course of the last 15 years in particular, the Greens have exerted more influence, and same with independents. And the minor parties, or single cause parties, have typically influenced the Senate the most. So, unsurprisingly, on the ballot for the Senate, there was groups that were lots of minor party groups. Some apparently there's about 17 different political parties and two independents are running the so about 18 boxes to fill out, and number them all. Didn't do just the 12 because at the top did all 18 and put Palmer at the bottom, and was quite happy to do that. Also put Palmer's party at the bottom on the green ballot slip and the independent at the top, but followed by Greens and then ALP. And so don't actually know who the independent is, right wing or left wing. Just know that they're not beholden to a political party, and so and might have a different type of eclectic sort of ways of doing things. People found actually when Rob Oakeshott, when independents really started to shine in the House of Representatives, was during the 2010 election, when Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor got into the House of Reps. And those two individuals um, actually became a pivotal point for the policy decisions that the ALP made, and it would have been the same had the Liberal National Coalition got into power at that time, or government at that time. So in Australia, it is actually the case that the independents can exert influence in the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Australian system doesn't elect the head of state. It's appointed by the Prime Minister. They're appointed by the Prime Minister. So whoever becomes Prime Minister elects the Governor General. And the Governor General is officially, ceremonially, the one that rubber stamps what they call royal assent. Okay, so acts as the ceremonial replacement for the monarch. Makes no legal decisions whatsoever, writes no laws at all, or statutes or policies, or has any say over anything. Typically, the response is, and this has been the only response since the Whitlam government that's known about anyway, is that they just rubber stamp to make sure that the procedure's gone through. It's all procedural. It's ceremonial and procedural. So when the House of Reps and the Senate have already made a decision to pass something into law as a statute or whatever, the Governor General just goes, okay then, and that's it, and accepts the will of the people. They don't do anything other than that. And the powers of the Governor General got curtailed after the Whitlam government, because a man named John Kerr was the Governor General at the time, and Whitlam was a very popular figure in Australian politics. He was a JFK like man in Australian history, and the CIA apparently did some shady deal with John Kerr to have the Whitlam government overthrown and create a constitutional crisis by doing so, because he didn't really have the authority to do that. Whitlam was lawfully elected with his team to be Prime Minister, so he didn't have authority to do so, or something, some dodgy thing to do with the CIA. So it's really interesting that people act these days as though the USA has just suddenly become a frenemy, with terrorists or whatever it might be, or Trump and Elon Musk and those guys acting like dickheads, when in actuality there has been other instances in Australia's past where they've been betrayed by the United States. The CIA was, in that time period of Whitlam and before that, trying to interfere in other people's governments. They overthrew a leader in Chile and installed Pinochet. They tried to overthrow Whitlam. That part worked, but John Kerr got the boot, and Australia really wasn't impressed, and they elected an ALP government afterwards in the form of the Hawke government, Rob Hawke. Or maybe Whitlam served a second term. I don't actually know the year that happened. It was a long time ago. And so in the decade before the Whitlam government, so back into the 1960s, when you start getting to Menzies, sort of the general direction of the Menzies territory, and after the founding of the Australian Liberal Party, which is, Americans might not comprehend this, actually the Conservative Party, but they're not as conservative as it gets. Australia doesn't make a lot of sense to USA, okay? And USA does not make a lot of sense to Australia. They're actually quite different. The before 1960s, when Walter Burley Griffin was tasked with as the architect to design Canberra and the Australian Capital Territory for the building of the new Parliament House, because in the 1930s onwards there was one in Canberra, and before that there was one in Melbourne. So the capital moved from Melbourne to Canberra in the 1930s, and then the site of the Parliament House moved up the road a bit in the 1960s with the redesign of Canberra by Walter Billy Griffin. And so in that time period, there was a lot of things going on in Australia, including the desegregation movement. And so they haven't really called it segregation in Australia, but that's actually what it was. And that followed on from activities in the 1950s also. So didn't necessarily start in the 1960s. It started before that, but things really started to build up in the 1960s with those type of movements. The other thing that also happened in the 1960s was the building of Pine Gap facility in the Northern Territory. And that followed from the Maralinga and associated nuclear weapons tests that the United Kingdom did in South Australia in the early 1960s and the late 1950s. After the United Kingdom betrayed Australia by nuking Australia repeatedly, the United States came flying in as a hero by putting a military site in the middle of the Northern Territory, which has been used for international spying and surveillance activities, and some are deeply concerned also the use of drone warfare in overseas wars. Okay, so they say battles of engagement. No, they're wars. Okay, people die. And so it's unsurprising then that anyone in Australia that's heard of those two things, including what's now called the Warmer Declared Zone, are unhappy about it. So Warmer Declared Zone is a place that was fenced off, basically where they dropped the nukes. Okay, so more or less, it's basically the same spot. Give or take a little bit here or there. Okay, and unsurprisingly, when someone drops a nuke on a spot, you can't live there. So they've got this Warmer Declared Zone, and they've been doing different things there, sometimes testing Mars rovers for NASA because of the red soil and everything else, but also doing weapons testing for companies like Alstom and Halliburton and weapons merchants conglomerates around the world, which means since the 1960s they've continued to bomb Warmer Declared Zone. It is a military site that's quite large. It's approximately 1/3 of the size of South Australia. South Australia is the size of Poland and Germany combined. You can fit most of Europe in South Australia. So to say 1/3 of South Australia is like saying an entire country, because Australia is a continent. And it's a continent, and so 1/3 of South Australia is a very big place. There's three ways that people typically travel from Adelaide to Darwin via Alice Springs. Now, this is important to know to understand how this affects people. Okay, so, and also the tourism industry as well. So one of the things that happen, one of the choices is you can drive by car, and it'll take you about 3 or 4 days by car to get from Adelaide to Darwin. 3 or 4 days of continuous travel, about 12-hour drives per day. Okay, it's a long way. It's nearly 3,000 kilometers. Okay, the other way is by a train line called the Garn. which costs about $1,000 or something like that. It's too expensive. You can't get pension or excursion tickets for it. Like you might be able to in some of the other states. Different states have different things like that. So having travelled around lots of different states, that can mean anything. But technically, South Australia and Northern Territory are not the same state anyway. So it's a private corporate train line now called the Gun for tourists to go on. The other way is by plane, like aeroplane. That'll cost you probably $1,000. A one-way ticket to Alice Springs from Adelaide probably costs you $500. So that's expensive. The other alternative is what's called the Greyhound bus service. Now, the Greyhound bus service, some years ago, I don't know if they're still doing it, was offering a spend $500 and you can catch any of their buses, like any of them, anywhere they run in Australia for a 12-month period. So if you caught 2 buses in that 12-month period, once the time was up, you're done. But you could catch as many buses as you liked, and you just booked them. You got the open ticket, $500, and so that means that you could get from Adelaide to Alice Springs to Darwin to as far as most likely Halls Creek or something like that in WA. You could get the Greyhound ones from Brisbane up north to Cairns, goes inland again to Darwin that way. It runs down the south coast all the way through New South Wales. It doesn't go inland in New South Wales. It doesn't go inland in Victoria, but it goes when it does dip a little bit inland. It doesn't go all the way down the south through New South Wales. It goes through Canberra and then to Melbourne. Okay, but you can't catch the Greyhound from Melbourne to Adelaide. So if you were to use a Greyhound bus service, you'd have, like, say from Sydney, just for argument's sake, from Sydney, the bus would take you from Sydney to Canberra, and then from Canberra to Melbourne. Then you'd have to catch a plane to Adelaide because there's no train service. And then you could catch a Greyhound again from Adelaide to Alice Springs if you're doing that, and then from Alice Springs to Darwin if you wanted to go that way. Transport in Australia is complicated, even by public transport, and it is nonetheless possible to travel super long distances for a relatively cheap price. So the consequence of that, though, is that if you were to do that, it would take you about 12 hours to get from Sydney to Canberra by bus. Or not 12 hours, sorry, that's an exaggeration, 8 hours. Then you have to wait for the next bus, which will take you 2 or 3 hours. And it'll be another 8 hours to Melbourne. So it'd take about 24 hours straight travelling with a couple of breaks there, Sydney to Melbourne part. Then you catch a plane from Melbourne to Adelaide, cost you about $150 in Australian, and that takes about 3 or 4 hours. And then the Greyhound bus from Adelaide to Alice Springs is an 18 to 20 hour journey. It takes about 3 hours to get to Port Augusta, which is just outside of Adelaide, and then it takes another 12 hours or so to get to Ernabella. And there's only one stop on that road between Port Augusta and Ernabella, which is just south of the Northern Territory border. And that's one roadhouse, and the bus stops there at 3 o'clock in the morning, literally. And you are only allowed enough time to go to the toilet. You don't have enough time to have a cigarette even. It's barely enough of that. There is a time limit on people getting off that bus and getting back on again. And the roadhouse isn't open for people to get meals or drinks, not even for the bus driver to get a cup of coffee. Okay, and that's after he's already driven for that long from Port Augusta, which was the previous meal stop. And then he doesn't get to stop again until Ernabella. And that is a long journey for someone to drive. Typically, it's considered road safety to stop every 2 hours. However, on that stretch of road, you're not allowed to. When you get off at that roadhouse, you'll see that there are fences on the other side of the road and behind the roadhouse as well. It says, don't go any further, military site. You could get shot. Okay. Yeah, that's how big that Woomera declared zone is, because that bus goes through Woomera declared zone. That's where the road passes through. So people get a brief break at Ernabella, and it is a must-stop place because there's a lot of communities up there that rely on the Ernabella bus stop to get between these other places. And then you go to across the border, and there's a much bigger roadhouse there that's really cool and has a paddock with emus in it and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. So once you get there, then you can have a meal. So you've already been traveling about 18 hours without a meal, without a cigarette, without the bus driver having a cup of coffee. And by that point, it's nearly lunchtime the next day. That's how long it takes. And then you've still got another 7 or 8 hours before Alice Springs. And to get there, you have to go up the highway and off the side a few kilometres to the left type of thing when you're going north is Pine Gap, which is about 20 kilometres south of Alice Springs proper. Okay, so there's people in those communities out there have a long way to travel to get anywhere and very few means of travelling. Okay, because there's one bus going north-south. That's it. Okay, doesn't stop everywhere, isn't allowed to stop most places in the South Australian leg. And there's this whole sectioned off area with fences that people can't cross because it's a military site. So that is a frightening thing for travellers, to get off a bus at 2 o'clock in the morning with having, as you might imagine, a bus ride, people don't sleep very much. Some people can handle it, but some people don't. And they get accustomed to when they get to the hostel or backpackers or whatever, having a snooze there. Or a campsite or whatever. So it's, for a traveller, that's scary to see. It's scary to see those fences. You don't see the military. It's nighttime. You just see the sign that says that. It's eerie because the roadhouse is unmanned. There's just a portaloo. Okay, and an outhouse, and people could be unnerved if they saw that. Saw that 1/3 of South Australia is in that situation, and all the communities around that, Adelaide, Darwin, Alice Springs, and all the remote towns are likewise affected by that. There are limitations to the means by which people can travel. It's not like they can expand the Garden Railway, so it goes, halfway up from Port Augusta and Alice Springs, and does a little detour to get to Uluru to increase tourism or something like that, and have a couple of train stations, a couple of more computers on the way. No, they can't do that because that whole area is a declared zone for the military. for companies like Alstom and Halliburton to bomb, and occasionally for SpaceX and NASA and whatever else to have a couple of rovers go on. So, they usually keep that quiet around Australia because people focus on other issues. There's plenty more to focus on when the vast majority of the population lives in coastal communities. However, anyone in Australia, across the entire continent, and anyone across the globe who's ever heard that story just goes, what? Because Halliburton is an American company and Alstrom's a French company. These are allies of Australia. So after the United Kingdom, which is supposed to be an ally of Australia, hey, Australia's supposed to be part of the United Kingdom through the British Commonwealth. Well, evidently not, because the United Kingdom bombed Australia. And the solution to being maltreated by the imperial aristocratic overseers like that was to have the corporate overseers come in and, just do that for another 60 years. And honestly, America being shown up for the fascist lie that it really is, seems like it's about time if you've ever caught that bus. And this body has. And can tell you that there are people who are relying on things like those yearly tickets from Greyhound and that bus line to do their normal business, because Alice Springs, at that point in time anyway, did not have a heart medicine facility. People get RFDS'd to Adelaide. If you're an American and don't know what that means, Royal Flying Doctor Service. So Australia has a special medical service where airplanes fly in. They can't go everywhere because not everywhere has proper airfield for them or strip to land on, which makes it more complicated. Alice Springs does not have all the medical facilities that you would expect the central capital of Australia to have, because it is the largest regional centre in the centre of the continent and does service a lot of remote communities, and also is an absolute tourist mecca. Everyone that goes to Uluru passes through Alice Springs at some point just to start off with. And they don't have at least a few years ago when that travelling happened, they don't have a heart surgery research majig facility in their hospital there. If someone comes in with a suspected heart problem, they get on a plane, go to Adelaide. Okay, they go to Adelaide, and of course the emergency facilities are usually pretty good, so that they could get there in time. They could get the support they need. RFTS are a good bunch. They really are. They do their best. However, that's a bit troubling that they have that, particularly if they want to talk about the idea that allegedly, whether or not it's actually true or not, remote communities have high rates of heart issues. Why haven't they got that heart machine facility in Alice Springs? When you talk about people trying to take care of their health, if they have to travel 1,800 kilometres by bus, because that's the only means of transportation that exists, and they have to pass through a war zone to get there, that sounds like maybe that's a bit much. Okay, it sounds like maybe that's not respectful. It sounds like maybe they need to shut down Warmer Declared Zone and stop treating Australia in general as some kind of bitch for foreign corporations, no matter who they might be. So at this point, it doesn't matter if it's the Yanks or the Ploms, because why would you replace it with anyone else? It'll be the same shit, different arsehole, different day. And while we're at it, Juice Media makes a point. Every Aussie fucking knows when they watch it. Coal seam gas everywhere, fucking nickel and tin mines and whatever else. It's like, okay, the mining industry is great if you're a FIFO worker, but everyone else isn't. And if you're in a regional community and the only jobs are for FIFO workers or people who work in tourism, that means the unemployment rate is high. It also means Airbnbs jacking the price up of the fucking rent, and people who are local or people who are recent not being able to afford rental properties. Okay, so this corporatisation of the Australian outback, okay, and militarisation of 1/3 of South Australia, corporate militarisation, is disgusting. It's absolutely fucking disgusting. And they wonder why all these people flooded to the major cities in the 70s, or why the cities became overpopulated and the rent went high and the mortgages went high and people couldn't afford housing there anymore. And we've got this rental bubble, real estate bubble in the cities that's bursting everywhere, with all these people running away to regional centres that can't afford to have them, because the moment they show up, no one can afford housing. Okay? This corporate crap in Australia needs to stop. And so Clive Palmer was a bit fucking rich. If he thought he could gallivant around in January, February, after Trump started mucking up and became the president, as a billionaire who wants to build the Titanic of all fucking things, okay, trying to fucking say that he was going to have a Trump at a Patriots party named after Donald Trump, when that guy's a fucking unloved, unwashed billionaire scumbag with, you know, shitty fucking FIFO job minds fucking flying around, basically up the arse of Gina Rinehart and her South African friends, which includes Elon Musk. Now, why the fuck would any Australian support that? He must be fucking off his face. That man's going to get canned at the fucking polls tomorrow. So canned it's not even fucking funny. And as for the AP and Liberal Party and stuff like that, they still need to pull their bloody fingers out. Because both of them have had 60 fucking years to sort that fucking shit out, and both of them have contributed to this fucking mess. So, no, Palmer, you're not getting jack fucking shit. The other parties are going to fucking change. And good on you, Juice Media, for supporting independence. We hope they support Australia as well.